Welcome back to this Voiceflow tutorial. We were able to basically get our food menu using the get request, and we're also able to learn about the object path for a JSON response in Voiceflow. Now in this video we're going to restructure the JSON response that we get from this get request, and we're going to restructure it in such a way that it is, easier to read basically. Now the way we're going to do that is that we're going to use a JavaScript step. Now this JavaScript code that I'm about to use is something you can easily generate from ChatGPT or Gemini or any of the AI tools, some of the AI tools that are available to you, right? So it's not much of a big deal really. If you can just explain your situation, it would help you craft the correct code, right? So, but I will do my best to explain what it is I have here, right? So I will copy that now and paste it for us to see. So first of all, we need to grab our JavaScript step. So we can come here and just come here and add our JavaScript, Control V. Now, one thing about so let's start this way. So the first thing is that we initialize a variable called I. We initialize it to 1. Now we take the meal type. Remember the meal type that we set to either breakfast, lunch, or dinner. It's now we'll use it, right? So we'll set the meal type. So we have that meal type. It's a string, so we use a string method on it called trim. That trim, what trim does is that it removes any excess white spaces, before or after the word breakfast, lunch, or dinner, right? That is to make sure, because in coding, spacing matters, right? Any space that you place around your variable matters, especially for strings. Then you have dot to lowercase. That just basically, brings the casing, right, of the meal type to lowercase. You might be wondering why that is necessary. If you're using the buttons, sometimes you may not use the button. Actually, you can still type even though the buttons are the options provided for you. So in case the user uses a capitalized casing or uppercase, right, this would ensure that it's taken back to lowercase. Now all these operations done here on the meal type will then be the final value would then be assigned to the target meal variable. So the target meal variable is the operation, is the result of all these operations here. Now the next thing is that we enter into a for loop. So a for loop just basically is something that would basically go through each and every single key here, right? It will go here to go to 0 and search for lunch or whatever meal type that we've selected. So let's say we selected lunch. It will come to 0, search for lunch. It will come to 1, search for lunch, and to come to 2, search for lunch. That's basically what the for loop is meant to do. Now they said for const key in response, you can ignore const for now. The key that we're talking about in response, remember we said this is response. So now the key that we're talking about now is 0, 1, or 0, 1, and 2, right? Remember I just said the for loop will help us loop through each and every one of these values. Then we then say response.has own property of key. That is, if this is just a check just to be sure that okay, response indeed has 0, 1, or 2. Now we then say let entry, which is in a new variable now, equal response then square bracket key. So what that means is that entry will be equal to this, the whole response, but now for just this key alone. So meaning that entry equals all these values here. Does that make sense? So now if that is the case, if this is entry, right, we can then proceed and then say, okay, if entry.meal. Now we've already said this entire thing, this thing here is entry. So entry.meal here is equal to lunch. Do you understand? So now entry.meal is equal to lunch. Then it said if entry.meal, then double ampersand means these, you want to use two conditions here, right? So these two conditions must be true for this if statement to be true. So basically, if entry.meal, that is if this lunch value exists, and double ampersand entry.meal.lowercase.trim equals target meal. So now we're now checking if this lunch value here exists, that's one, and this lunch value here equals the target value, right? The value that was gotten from this meal type, which the user typed in or which the user selected. If it is equal, that is, if what is coming from the menu is equal to what the user has selected, right? If that is the case, then we have a new variable here called message. So message will be equal to, so basically just append to message, you have this value here, you have I, then entry.item, right? Entry.item, the item itself, and then for entry.price. So basically what we would have here at the end of the day is that we would have a menu that looks like this. You have one, basically something like salad for $3.5. Then you also have something like pasta Alfredo for $6. So that's basically what we are trying to achieve here. Now, if message is equal to an empty string, then it implies that none of this, that this condition was not met for some reason, and then it will return a message, sorry, no items found for the meal type, right, that you selected. Now, this should be meal type actually. Meal type, yep. Okay, now the meal type that we're talking about is the exact same meal type here, right? So you cannot, or you should not, reference any new variable within the JavaScript step that has not yet been initialized in your Voiceflow workflow. If your variable such as I has already been initialized in the JavaScript, you're fine. But if you notice, in this case, we did not initialize meal type here at all. Rather, we got meal type from the Voiceflow workflow itself, right? So if you're not going to initialize anything here, or you want your code to interact with a variable from the workflow, you need to ensure that that variable has already been initialized in the workflow. Now, one other thing that I have not done is to change this. This should be menu response, not just response, right? Then this as well should be menu response, right? Then this one here as well should be menu response. Great. So yeah, so now that we're done with that, yeah, there's one more thing based off of the explanation I just gave, right? If you notice, message was not initialized at any point in time, right? Initialization within JavaScript, you would usually use the word let or the word const, right? So there was no initialization for message. So that means that we should create a message variable basically within our workflow. So the best thing to do is to, let's do that now. So we can just use the set step. So that would have to come before the JavaScript because we're going to use the message variable within the JavaScript. So we can just do this, just drag this here, and then we come here and then we say, so we create a new variable called message, then create the variable, and we can set it to nothing, right? So what actually happens in the background is that Voiceflow will set this message value to a 0, but the 0 is a string, so it has quotations around it, right? Basically, so it's a 0 basically. Now that we've initialized it within Voiceflow ecosystem or workflow, we can then, send it to this JavaScript, and it shouldn't give us any more issues, or it shouldn't give us any issues. Now, the next thing that we can do here is that we can basically, create a message step, right, to show the user the menu that we've been able to retrieve, right, based off of their selection. So let's do that now. So we'll just bring this here. Oh, start it again. Okay, so we can then join this to this guy here. Now let's come here and type a few things. Say here are some options for the meal type that you selected, right? Then we can use a colon there, and then we can then type message, right? So you can see we have message here. So message will have already been altered. So message is equal to 0 here. Message gets altered in the JavaScript and becomes the menu that we're looking for, and then message is then printed out for the user to see, right, as the menu that we're looking for. So we can then come here and say, which one would you like to order? So let's generate our variants. Okay, great. I need to edit this variance a bit. Okay, great. Now that we've edited our messages to our liking, now let's test this to see if it'll work. So we'll test it end to end. Fingers crossed. So we select lunch. Great, so you can see it works. Here are a few choices for lunch. Then we have this, which would you prefer? Great, I think we have done enough for this video. I hope it is still making sense. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.